Hello, my name is Lauren and welcome to the Theoretical YouTube channel, where today we are diving back into the Sensational 6 EU by exploring one of the most interesting characters in Disney's pantheon of recurring cast members, Maximilian Goof. Or Max, if you're on a nickname basis.
That must be Maxie.
Who, despite being the son of one of the most prominent characters in the franchise, hasn't actually appeared in as many projects as you might expect. But the ones he has been in, absolutely iconic. But what makes Max such a standout from the franchise? What makes him such a relatable character? In other words, why can audiences so easily see eye to eye with him? Well, after today, I think I might just have an answer for you.
If we listen to each other.
So, like a few different Disney characters that we've covered before, it's actually kind of hard to pinpoint exactly where Max comes from. For instance, Goofy's origin is often cited as this dippy dog character from the 1932 cartoon Mickey's Review. And it was a full 7 years before he would actually be called Goofy in an on-screen appearance. But it's pretty obvious that this character naturally evolved from the earlier debut. But the story's a little shakier for his son, Max. Goofy was shown to have a son as early as the 1950s cartoon Fathers Are People.
Hey, fellas, I'm a father.
Congratulations, George.
Of course, this was during a period of cartoon history where Goofy himself went by the name George Geef and didn't exactly exemplify many of the characteristics that we associate with the character today. He might look more like the modern Goofy than the Dippy Dog character did, but I think we can all agree that his voice, mannerisms, and personality are markedly different.
I quit.
So, Goofy Jr., or George Jr., or just Jr., was a reoccurring character in the 1950s Goofy cartoons. And he certainly fills a similar role to the character who would eventually become Max. But his character design is significantly different, with red hair, a pink nose, some variation in facial features, notably no teeth. Not to mention that he didn't even have ears. So literally everything you might use to put together a Max costume. In terms of personality, Goofy Jr. was kind of a brat, often causing trouble for his father to deal with. So because his name, character design, and personality are all so drastically different from the later characterization, I'd actually argue that this is not the origin of Max Goof at all. And that Goofy Jr. was an entirely different character in his own right, and a significantly worse one at that. This, of course, means that Max's first official appearance wasn't until 1992 in the premiere of Goof Troop in the Disney afternoon television time slot.
Yeah.
And this introduction paints Max in a much more familiar light. He's Goofy's son, pretty street smart, kind, a tad lazy, and always getting into cartoon shenanigans with his best friend PJ. This version of Max has a great and loving relationship with his father, who he can find a bit boring or at times embarrassing, but a significantly better role model than their neighbor Pete.
It's a simple equation. You're gonna pass that test if you have to study all night, see? Flunk. And you're grounded forever!
This is also one of the youngest appearances of Max in the entire franchise, to the point where he's actually voiced by a woman.
I think this is going to take drastic measures.
Dana Hill, a prolific voice actress who you might also recognize as Audrey from National Lampoon's European Vacation.
This must be where they sacrificed virgins. God, I miss Jack.
A strange crossover. Goof Troop would run until 1993 and produced a total of 78 episodes in syndication. Did I watch all 78 episodes in preparation for this video? Of course not! This show stopped airing reruns 4 years before I was born, but I did watch the first 10 episodes, and I sure do hope that Max didn't go through any drastic character development over the course of the show. I suspect he didn't, but please let me know in the comment section if he did. After the success of Goof Troop, a similar concept was adapted into a feature-length television movie known as A Goofy Movie in 1995. A Goofy Movie ages Max up into early high school, and we begin to see some developing patterns in his characterization and relationship to Goofy. Now voiced by Jason Marsden, Max here is insecure, extremely embarrassed by Goofy's goofiness, and highly motivated by a sense of individuality. Like any teenage boy, Max wants to be seen as cool by his classmates, and especially his crush, Roxanne, who is just as awkward and self-conscious as he is. Is this the most painfully accurate teen flirting ever put on screen?
Yeah.
Good.
Great.
Terrific.
Wonderful.
All right.
Okay.
The plot of the film evolves around a lie that Max tells to Roxanne about a fishing trip that his father is forcing him on, instead claiming that he'll be on stage at a Powerline concert in LA. who's basically a pop star fusion between Michael Jackson, Prince, and maybe David Bowie. The conflict of the film derives from the relationship between Max and Goofy. Father and son disagree on the amount of autonomy that he deserves as he transitions into a young man. Despite lying to his father for the majority of the film, Max does eventually earn Goofy's trust, and the two bond over a shared understanding of the other's love and perspective. It is a great film. I do highly recommend checking it out if you haven't seen it in a while. The film was successful enough to get a sequel 5 years later. This was an extremely goofy movie, which I could have sworn I had seen before, but I think I actually had just had like 60% of the plot spoiled for me by the bajillion Disney Channel commercials growing up. Here, Max is aged up again as a freshman headed off to college.
Oh, I can't wait to get out of here.
Oh, here, let me help you pack.
Dad,
Instead of pop stars, now he and his friends are obsessed with extreme sports, especially skateboarding, and plan to make a name for themselves by winning the College X Games. But this plan for claiming his own identity is overshadowed when Goofy shows up at his new school. Turns out, job security is just as bad in this universe, and he needs to complete the last year of his college degree in order to be gainfully employed. So the conflict in this film is still about the independence that Max wants from his father, but not like we forgot all the lessons we learned in the last movie kind of way. For instance, after his initial shock, Max is pretty on board with Goofy's education plan, just so long as their social lives don't overlap too much.
Cut the old man some slack. He has to be here. He was fired and he can't find a good job without a degree.
Which obviously happens because Goofy is cluelessly clingy. Basically, the sequel explores similar themes of autonomy within the father and son relationship, but adapted to fit an age-appropriate level of maturity. It's a good sequel. I recommend watching more than 60% of it. And technically, Max did have one on-screen appearance in between the two Goofy movies. He was one of the featured vignettes in the 1999 television film Mickey's Once Upon a Christmas, specifically A Very Goofy Christmas. Here, Max is even younger than he was depicted in Goof Troop, and the plot revolves around his fading belief in Santa. When Pete, world's worst neighbor, convinces Max that Santa isn't real, Goofy then spends the rest of the holiday trying to keep his son's belief alive another year. Santa, of course, is ambiguously real in this world, but of course Goofy himself is mocked throughout the narrative for his naive trust in the concept. So here, even at a much younger age, we still see that same theme of growing up reflected in the tension between father and son, where Goofy longs to protect his son's childhood innocence and Max grows to resent the resolutions Goofy has outside of the status quo. And here he was voiced by Disney Channel regular Sean Fleming. In the 2004 sequel Mickey's Twice Upon a Christmas, a significantly worse movie, Max is once again featured in the short Christmas Maximus. Here he is shown as a young man, possibly in college, maybe already graduated, bringing home his new girlfriend, Mona, to meet his dad. Same deal as usual. Max is embarrassed by Goofy's goofiness and asks him to make him look good in front of his new love interest. Somehow this song ends up stuck in my head way too often, like at least once a month.
make me look good. Make me shine.
If you make me look good, I just might get to make her mine. Make me look good. Anyway, Max learns once again that other people don't find his father nearly as embarrassing as he does, and the family bonds over a shared good-natured goofiness. From 2001 to 2003, Max would make occasional appearances on Mickey's House of Mouse, where he worked as the club's valet. Here he's shown as a young man again, either in late high school or early college. Since he's still dating Roxanne and not Mona, I would personally assume that this is still high school and that there's just this big off-screen falling out that we never get to see. And everyone knows that baseless assumptions are always right.
Say, everybody, guess what I just heard?
He's not heavily featured in the show, but does have some featured plot lines in the episodes Max's embarrassing date, Max's new car, and Goofy for a Day. And apart from an extremely brief cameo in the 2017 DuckTales reboot where he and PJ appear in some wallet photographs, those are all of really? Okay. Those are all of Max's on-screen appearances. In terms of other literature, he was obviously featured in every comic adaptation of Goof Troop, the Little Golden Books, and the novel adaptation of A Goofy Movie. And he was a playable character in the video game adaptation of a Goofy movie. But otherwise, Max Goof is a relatively rare character in Sensational 6 media, and not at all in the last 20 years. Not to mention that there is a strange amount of consistency in his appearances. For instance, I kept mentioning his age throughout this video because it varies so drastically between depictions, and you could honestly plot out each one of Max's appearances on one shockingly coherent timeline. In a world where Mickey could be a nightclub host one day, a steamboat captain the next, and then somehow a 17th century musketeer, Max is only ever a normal kid. Even Goofy doesn't have a codified consistency. Like Mickey and Donald and all the other members of the gang, he plays whatever role is necessary to the story. But Max doesn't. In fact, Max seems to only exist in the world where the Sensational Six are at rest, not playing characters in a greater narrative. Where Goofy is just a department store photographer or an assembly line worker in order to make ends meet for his suburban family. Where Pete is just a horrible neighbor and not a criminal or a murderer, the literal ghost of Christmas yet to come. Max is Max. End of story. And I think this consistency is really a direct byproduct of Max's role in the franchise as a whole. He exists as an aspect of his father. He humanizes Goofy and grounds him in a role other than the zany klutz who can't be trusted to complete basic tasks. In these depictions, Goofy is a competent father. But where Goofy has been known to represent the everyman, especially in those 1950s shorts, Max is supposed to represent the every kid. He's written in a way that makes his motivations almost universally relatable in a child or a young adult's formation of a sense of self. Max is average in almost every way. He's not a great student, but he's not that bad either. He has a few close friends, but he's not extremely popular. But he's also not a boring character cutout. Despite being characterized with a generic kid template, Max is also consistently written with strong and clear motivations and interests. But even the things that he is specifically interested in other words, pop music and extreme sports, are vague enough in application in order to be widely applicable across general audiences. For example, maybe you don't like skateboarding as much as Max, but you probably liked something like he did. Whether it's ballet or street hockey or playing D&D or watching Disney movies, kids have a deep love and investment in their hobbies that they can see paralleled in Max. And besides his hobbies, Max's core motivation is another reflection of the audience he's meant to connect to. The constant embarrassment that he has in regards to Goofy manifests as an insecurity that he will fail to form an identity outside of his father. But what exactly is he insecure about? His gawky laugh, his nose and teeth getting bigger, his voice deepening, just general discomfort with his body morphing into a more adult form. The fear he has is not becoming Goofy. It's the physical and awkward act of growing up, of being a teenage boy. And whether or not it's conscious on his part, what Goofy represents to Max is an adult who embodies the worst parts of puberty. The clumsiness, the awkward social interactions, the prolonged feeling of walking out of step with the rest of the world. However, Goofy is not embarrassed by these aspects of himself, and that gives Max a great deal of internal conflict, because what he's feeling is not wholly embarrassment, but also envy. Max, again, whether or not he realizes this, is envious of the way that his father moves through the world unbothered by it, which directly contradicts the insecurities that he feels as he becomes more like him physically. The end of each film installment and stage of Max's growth therefore brings him a little closer to becoming more like his father emotionally. By which I mean to say, as he grows up, Max becomes both incrementally more mature and profoundly goofier. Max grounds Goofy, and Goofy enriches Max's inner self. Which, for a character who's meant to be a point of entrance and reflection for the younger audience coming of age themselves, is a valuable lesson in self-love and autonomy. Who knew cartoon dogs could get so deep? If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already for plenty more Disney content where this came from. I would obviously recommend checking out more of our Sensational 6 EU videos where we've taken similar deep dives into the history of every character from Scrooge McDuck to Clarabelle the Cow. And be sure to stay tuned for whoever we cover next. Suggestions definitely accepted in the comment section down below. In other news, you can also follow us on Twitter at Theory_Central. Or consider supporting us on Patreon, like the incredible David W., Alex Toquinto, and Byron Childs, all of whom make me look good when my parents ask how I can afford to live off a liberal arts degree. Spoilers, I have not quit my day job. Anyway, thanks for watching. Goof Troop had the worst music intro of any show in the Disney afternoon, and I'll see you later.